On a cool spring night, the Crimean Peninsula, long regarded as a fortress of Russian dominance, slumbered under an illusion of invincibility. At its core stood the Saky Air Base, a jewel in Russia's strategic crown, protected by overlapping tiers of air defenses. From Pantsir's one-point defense systems to the formidable S-400 Triumph batteries, it was a symbol of Moscow's air supremacy, engineered to detect, track, and destroy anything that dared breach its skies. But as the night deepened, an eerie hum whispered across the dark horizon, faint, fragmented, and easily overlooked. That hum became a swarm. 36 low-cost drones, many no larger than a suitcase and some assembled from commercial parts, pierced through Russia's $500 million integrated air defense system with surgical precision. In just 227 seconds, radar screens went dark, fireballs rose from command shelters, and decades of doctrinal overconfidence crumbled in the firelight. Russian operators, overwhelmed by sensor blizzards and conflicting signals, failed to mount a cohesive defense. What unfolded wasn't just a tactical loss, it was a revelation. A harbinger of modern warfare where agility, cost-efficiency, and swarm tactics eclipse size and legacy. How did one of the world's most expensive and fortified military assets fall to a wave of disposable drones? And what does it mean for the future of warfare when brute strength is no longer enough to survive the night? The Saky Air Base, carved into the western edge of Crimea near Novofedorovka, was more than just a launch pad for Russian warplanes. It was the spine of Moscow's air power projection in the Black Sea. A sprawling complex of hardened shelters, early warning radars, and reinforced control centers. It hosted Su-24M bombers, Su-30 fighters, and electronic warfare aircraft critical to Russia's operations in southern Ukraine. Every inch of the base had been fortified under the belief that it wasn't touchable. It wasn't hubris, it was doctrine. For decades, Russian military planners had invested heavily in an intricate web of air defenses known as the Integrated Air Defense System, or IADS. Unlike Western doctrines which emphasize offensive air superiority, Russia's IADS was built to be layered, redundant, and deeply rooted in ground-based missile coverage. From the Cold War through the post-Soviet resurgence, this concept matured into a defensive architecture considered one of the most advanced in the world. The S-400 Triumph, with its 400-kilometer range and multi-target engagement radar, was its crown jewel. Each launcher cost tens of millions, and it didn't operate alone. Around it buzzed the shorter-range Pantsir S-1 systems, capable of intercepting drones and low-flying cruise missiles, paired with electronic warfare suites designed to jam, spoof, and blind incoming threats. To military analysts watching from afar, Crimea had become a fortress. After Russia's illegal annexation in 2014, the peninsula was transformed into a bristling bastion of anti-access area denial. To a D in strategic parlance, satellites showed regular drills, long-range radar calibration exercises, and the visible presence of surface-to-air missile domes emerging from the coastal hills like dragon's teeth. NATO planners acknowledged the complexity of operating near this theater. Even advanced Western aircraft risked detection and engagement from hundreds of kilometers out. For any Ukrainian force, even dreaming of touching this hardened base would have seemed like suicide until the battlefield began to evolve. While Russia clung to its faith in large, expensive air defense layers, Ukraine was building something different, smaller, cheaper, and more agile. Since 2022, when Kyiv first began experimenting with commercial drones strapped with grenades, the trajectory was clear. Democratized air power was rewriting the rules. Unlike the predictable flight patterns of manned aircraft or missiles, these small drones, often modified in garages or rural workshops, could approach from unexpected angles, fly low under radar beams, and confuse even the most sophisticated detection systems with sheer numbers and noise. Long before the night sky over Saky lit up with streaks of fire and plumes of smoke, Ukrainian planners had begun to study the rhythm of Russian air defenses like a chessboard. Crimea wasn't just occupied territory, it was symbolic, strategic, and vulnerable in ways that satellite photos alone couldn't reveal. In the war's second year, Ukraine had shifted from reacting to Russian assaults to shaping the battlefield itself. And central to that shift was the drone. It began modestly. Small commercial quadcopters were rigged with explosives and used in the dense forests of the Donbass to harass Russian trenches. Their impact was psychological as much as tactical. Russian troops reported being stalked from above, sometimes for hours, by buzzing machines they couldn't see. By the time the drone dropped its payload, the fear had already done half the damage. Then came scale. Ukraine, with help from domestic engineers and international partners, began developing longer-range fixed-wing drones capable of flying hundreds of kilometers, often on autopilot, guided by GPS waypoints. These weren't just harassment tools, they were weapons of attrition, used to hit fuel depots, ammunition stores, and radar sites deep inside Russian-occupied territory. They flew at night, low and slow, invisible to conventional radars until it was too late, and they were cheap, far cheaper than the missiles they destroyed. In response, Russia bolstered its defenses, deploying more Pantsir systems, recalibrating its radar coverage, and widening electronic warfare zones. Yet no system is perfect, and none can be everywhere at once. The further Russia extended its defenses, the thinner each layer became. Every battery deployed to defend a rail junction in Kherson was one less defending an airbase in Crimea. Ukraine was counting on that. Every drone lost was data gained on radar behavior, interception times, and radio frequencies. Every failed strike was a rehearsal for something bigger. By spring 2025, a pattern emerged. Ukrainian drones were probing deeper, staying longer, and surviving more often. A strike on Sevastopol's harbor disabled a fuel depot for days. Another hit near Jankoy appeared to blind a key radar station for several hours. These weren't isolated incidents, they were dry runs, part of a campaign to map out the limits of Russian air defense in real time. Saky became an obvious target not just for its military value, but for its symbolism. Russian jets based there had launched countless strikes against Ukrainian cities. Hitting it would send a message to both sides. But there was more at stake than morale. By degrading Russian air operations from Crimea, Ukraine could loosen the grip on the southern front and buy breathing room for its forces elsewhere. It wasn't just about firepower. It was about tempo, forcing Russia to react, reshuffle, and reinforce where at least expected behind closed doors. And Kyiv drone teams worked hand in hand with military planners to design an attack that would do more than just damage hardware. It needed to paralyze the base, overwhelm its defenses, confuse its operators, and deny its air assets the ability to launch. The plan relied on deception, saturation, and timing. Decoy drones would draw fire. Others would jam or spoof radar signals. A third wave would strike command nodes and kill zones simultaneously. The goal was not just destruction, it was disruption, and every minute of disarray on the Russian side was an opportunity for Ukraine to maneuver elsewhere. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment strike. It was the culmination of months of trial, error, and iteration. The drones may have been cheap, but the intelligence behind them was anything but. And for the first time in the war, Ukraine wasn't just playing catch-up. It was setting the terms, choosing the battlefield, and daring a superpower to adapt faster than it could be out. In the days leading up to the strike, the Crimean coastline appeared quite deceptively so. Russian military convoys moved with their usual routine through the interior roads, resupplying fuel points and ferrying munitions between bunkers. To observers on the ground, nothing looked out of place. But above, in the unblinking gaze of satellites and high-altitude reconnaissance drones, something was different. The pace of Ukrainian surveillance intensified. Patterns were forming, flights looping just outside radar range, drone sorties, mapping electronic emissions, and infrared scans revealing subtle shifts in base activity. Ukrainian intelligence wasn't looking for a weakness. It was waiting for the perfect moment. Inside the Saky Air Base there was little urgency. Maintenance crews performed routine inspections. Radar operators manned their stations, occasionally alerting to unidentified aerial phenomena that turned out to be birds, wind-blown debris, or harmless decoys. After months of drone harassment across the theater, Russian personnel had begun to tune out the noise. A drone here or there was manageable, but not alarming. Many believed that the base's defenses were layered and lethal, enough to handle anything short of a full-scale missile barrage. Complacency crept in like fog on one overcast morning. A Pantsir crew chief logged a spike in drone noise over the western perimeter. It was dismissed as a false alarm, perhaps a drifting weather drone or signal interference. The alert didn't trigger a response, just a note in the duty log. Elsewhere, in a hardened command shelter, officers were reviewing flight plans for sortie operations over Mykolaiv. The threat, in their minds, remained across the Dnipro River, not at their gates. But Ukraine had shifted the center of gravity. Its drones weren't probing front lines anymore, they were orbiting deep behind them, tracking thermal signatures, counting vehicles, identifying antenna types. From high over the Black Sea and coastal villages, operators gathered metadata: the delay between radar ping and Pantsir activation, the duration of S-400 tracking locks, the average reload time after a short burst of fire. It wasn't espionage, it was digital patterning, and it gave Ukraine something no missile could deliver: predictability. In Kyiv, commanders reviewed the data and saw opportunity. The rotating crews at Saky were running predictable shifts. The intercept protocols were rigid, reacting the same way to similar inputs. And more crucially, the air defense system responded best when threats came from a single axis. Multi-directional saturation would exploit that rigidity, split operator focus, overwhelm processors, and drain interceptors faster than they could be replenished. By the final week before the strike, Ukrainian engineers had constructed a digital model of Saky's defenses so detailed it could simulate how long each radar system would take to detect, track, and respond to a simultaneous drone assault. They identified blind spots, low-altitude approach lanes through terrain folds, and over water. The final trigger wasn't a date, but a condition: the perfect alignment of operator fatigue, weather cover, and radar rotation cycles. Inside the Russian base, no alarms sounded, no extra patrols were ordered. There were no emergency drills. The soldiers slept, the officers planned airstrikes, and the radar screens glowed with the steady hum of normalcy. In Kyiv, the final command was given. A wave of 36 drones, small, silent, and relentless, was programmed for launch. Some would jam, others would decoy, and the rest would kill. It wasn't about brute force. It was about friction, saturation, and collapse. Russia's $500 million shield was about to face something it wasn't built for. The human cost of certainty in a war where adaptation had become the ultimate weapon. In the weeks that followed, Saky became more than a battlefield. It became a case study. Across the defense ministries of Europe, Asia, and the Middle East, commanders gathered in private rooms with video loops of the explosion, grainy images of drone trajectories, and a single uncomfortable question on the table. What if this happens to us? Because what unfolded in Crimea wasn't a fluke. It wasn't just a lapse in readiness or a lucky hit by a clever adversary. It was the logical conclusion of a changing doctrine, one where speed, cost efficiency, and saturation replaced the brute strength of missiles and jets, where smaller actors could now challenge larger ones, not by matching their arsenals, but by sidestepping them entirely. For years, global military doctrine had banked on layered defense. Systems like the S-300, S-400, and Patriot had been touted as walls in the sky designed to hold back the tide of cruise missiles, stealth bombers, and long-range threats. But Saky proved those walls had seams, and that with the right combination of software, silence, and swarm tactics, they could be flooded before anyone knew where the leak began. Russia's loss was not just one of hardware, but of strategic credibility. The S-400, long marketed as the pinnacle of anti-aircraft technology, had failed to fire. Not because it was technically flawed, but because it had never been designed for this type of war. It wasn't built to deal with dozens of semi-autonomous threats arriving from multiple directions at once. It wasn't built to fight a thinking, evolving, probing enemy that valued confusion as much as firepower. And perhaps most telling of all, it wasn't built to adapt in real time. Ukraine, with far fewer resources, had embraced that adaptability. It had leaned into the principle that agility beats rigidity, that information is more powerful than intimidation, that a cheap drone, properly programmed, could do what millions of rubles in defense hardware could not: make the enemy guess, and then guess wrong. The Saky strike became a warning, a quiet whisper to every military planner who still believed air superiority could be bought with big budgets and long-range radars. The future wouldn't belong to the side with the biggest bombs. It would belong to the side that moved fastest, thought smallest, and struck unexpectedly. For Ukraine, the moment marked a turning point, not just in battle plans, but in belief that they could fight smarter, not just harder, that they could redefine the rules, not just resist them, that in a war often defined by trenches and attrition, they could still deliver shock and awe, just not in the way anyone had predicted. As for Russia, the lessons had just begun. Its generals would now face a battlefield where the skies above were no longer owned, only borrowed. And in that borrowed space, even a buzzing drone could bring an empire to its knees. In the shadow of Saky's smoldering ruins, a new era was quietly taking shape, not with fanfare or declarations, but in the calculated adjustments unfolding in war rooms thousands of miles away. Across the globe, defense departments began rewriting their assumptions. Generals who once dismissed drone warfare as a novelty now requested urgent reviews. Contractors retooled product lines. Budget allocations shifted. The era of big-ticket static defense systems was no longer sacred. It was vulnerable. In Beijing, observers analyzed the strike frame by frame. For China, which had invested heavily in both drone technology and anti-access strategies in the South China Sea, the implications were profound. If drones could bypass Russian IADS with such ease, then the US Navy or Taiwan might already be drawing up playbooks of their own. Iranian military thinkers, long fascinated by swarm tactics, interpreted the event as validation. They had used drones against Saudi oil fields before, but now the scale had shifted. The precedent had been set not by a rogue actor, but by a sovereign state using precision, patience, and planning to punch far above its weight. Even in the West, the shockwaves rippled. NATO exercises in Poland and the Baltics suddenly included swarm penetration drills. US Air Force planners revisited assumptions about base hardening and dispersal. What if forward-deployed aircraft were left exposed? What if command nodes were too centralized? In classified briefings, the phrase Saky strike became shorthand for a low-cost, high-impact disruption campaign. The Pentagon didn't just want to defend against it, they wanted to understand how to replicate it. And all the while, Ukraine watched the world watching them. They didn't boast, they didn't overreach. Instead, they refined. Each successful strike, each drone that returned with data, or didn't return at all, fed back into a growing ecosystem of battlefield innovation. Engineers wrote new code. Field commanders adjusted launch sequences. Operators, many in their 20s, trained on simulators patched together with open-source software and battlefield experience. This was warfare as evolution, iterative, responsive, but unbound by the constraints of legacy. Meanwhile, Russia recalibrated. Radar units were now spaced wider, air bases were cloaked in camouflage nets, and fuel depots were broken into smaller, distributed sites. But beneath the surface, the deeper cracks remained. Fear had embedded itself into the chain of command, not fear of drones themselves, but fear of what they represented: uncertainty, disruption, the erosion of control. And the war was far from over. There would be more strikes, more adaptations, more moments where the old clashed with the new. But after Saky, the myth of impermeable air superiority had been shattered. In its place stood a different reality, one where ingenuity could outpace legacy, and where warfare no longer respected price tags. In the coming years, students at war, colleges would study what happened that night in Crimea. But for those who lived it, for those who heard the hum before the fire, they would remember it not as a battle, but as the moment the sky changed.